Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, it's time to begin. Let's start a countdown. 20, 19, 18, 17. I just start the song.
Oh, don't you know, it's the Bill Arnold Show. It's Bill.
And a warm welcome to the Bill Arnold Show. I'm looking forward to today. Say, Wyatt, how many years have you been with Faith Radio now?
Well, just over 2 officially this fall.
So would this be the third time that we've had a chance to have Ace Collins on talking about the stories behind the best-loved songs of Christmas?
Yeah, since I've been here. I guess I don't know if you had him on before I was your producer. But
yeah, we definitely did.
Yeah, since I've been here, this will be round number 3.
But it has become a tradition, one I completely get excited about every year. And since Ace was on talking about Christmas the last time, we've added a couple of stations. We're in Boise, Idaho, and Normal, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
So our stations grow and our audience gets bigger. And for a lot of people, they're going to be hearing this for the very first time. And I'm so excited. Ace, I'm so glad you could join us today and next week.
I am glad to be here. The folks in Norman are celebrating because their football team had a big upset last week. And so they've had a really good season in Normal, Illinois. So, yeah, good to be joining all those Redbird fans down there.
Right. So I've always said these are a couple of the hours I most look forward to every year because not only do I love Christmas, but I love all the work and research you've done, and I love the way in which you deliver these beautiful stories of the behind the best loved songs of Christmas. So if you don't mind, can I start with a couple of my very favorites?
Sure.
Let's start with Silent Night.
Oh, gosh, what a great story. It was a stopgap measure, and I'll explain that. Just over 200 years ago, a man named Joseph Mohr was a young priest, and I mean a really young priest in Obendorf, Austria, planning his first Christmas Mass. And he went there to stoke up the furnaces and get everything ready for the choir presentation he was going to have. He had done most of his service and music, and the choir didn't work. And the organ didn't work, so the choir didn't have anything to sing with.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in a panic. He ran across town to visit Franz Gruber, one of his friends who was a school teacher. And Gruber said, "I'll play guitar with your music." And the guy said, no. The priest said, "It won't work. This is really high church music. It's got to have an organ." And that's when Gruber said, "Well, I guess we'll have to do something else." And he said, "Why don't we write something?" And that is when Mohr, the priest, remembered something he had written 3 years before on a visit to an uncle's at Christmas Eve. He was walking through the woods, and there was such silence in the air that he wrote a poem called Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. What is amazing to me is this guy had moved a couple of times since then and was able to immediately run back and find it. Because, I probably wouldn't have been able to find it. This guy found that poem. Gruber set it to music. And that night, Silent Night, in this little church in Obendorf, Austria, became the song that saved the Christmas Eve service. Well, that song probably would have never been heard again, except somebody had to fix the organ. And when they came by to fix the organ 3 weeks later, the guy said, "What did you do for music without the organ?" And he picked up his guitar, the priest did, and played him the song. And this guy said, "Play it again." And he wrote down the words and patiently learned the music. And then the organ was fixed and he left. Well, 30, 40 years later, the priest, now an older man, is walking through the streets of Cologne, Germany around Christmas time, and hears that song playing in the cathedral with the massive choir singing it. And he'd only used it once. He wondered how in the world had this song, Silent Night, suddenly appeared in Cologne, Germany, with everyone listening to it. And he walked in and over the next few weeks found out that the organ fixer, the guy who worked on the organ, had become the Johnny Appleseed of this song and taken it everywhere. And by the time the priest realized it, it had been translated into 30 different languages and was the most beloved and most sung carol of all time. To this day, it is not the highest selling song of all time. That belongs to White Christmas and Mariah Carey's song and a few others. But it is the most sung and best known of all of the Christmas carols. By the way, what was the name of the church in Austria, Obendorf, Austria, where this song was first sung? St. Nicholas.
And it's Father Moore and St.
Joseph
Nicholas
Moore.
Church. Joseph Moore and St. Nicholas Church.
M-O-H-R.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's just it's a fantastic story. And I don't
Well,
know.
and we should know that song. And it shows the power of one individual to carry something to the world. If you believe in something, you keep spreading it. One of the things I always talk about with my friends is this book that we're visiting about, which has gone into scores and scores of printings and has been translated in all these different languages, was rejected 27 times over 10 years before someone actually saw the potential in it. And it's amazing, the book that may be the best-selling author was not believed in for 10 years, and now it has opened up me to be Doc Holliday, I guess, in a lot of ways. Everybody, that's what the Smithsonian Institute calls me, and without that belief in one person. So you have to connect with the right person. And this guy who fixed the organ believed in the song, and Moore never peddled it, but this guy taught it to everyone. And so we still remember that priest and that school teacher all those years later because of a stopgap measure they put together to save a service. But look how much it has affected the world ever since.
Mm-hmm. Ace, is that
a miracle?
Yeah. Is Silent Night one of the songs that just brings tears to your eyes? Because it does me.
Silent Night is a powerful song, I think, especially when sung by children.
Okay.
There are elements that song has been used in movies, on television shows. For those of you who collect Golden Age of television songs, I mean, it has been sung, on things like the Donna Reed, Dick Van Dyke, and the other shows that were so popular in the 50s and 60s. I remember an episode of the Bing Crosby TV specials, and I didn't see it live. I caught it on YouTube 3 or 4 years ago, and it moved me a great deal, where you had two of the original members of the TV show Hogan's Heroes. That was Werner Klimpler, who played Colonel Klink, and John Banner, who played Schultz, mm-hmm. who sang it in the German language, the original German language, with Bing Crosby. And that was a powerful television moment when I heard that song. But it's just one of those songs that everybody can sing. It's very simple. I call it the Jesus Loves Me of Christmas songs.
So good. Ace Collins is my guest. The book we're talking about is Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. And it's really one of those books that should be part of all of your Christmas decorations that you take out this time of the year and have it on a coffee table, because you can have a guest pick up a book and read about a song, and then all of a sudden you've got a conversation going. And there's so many people that love these Christmas songs, and they don't know their origin, and they don't know the meaning behind them. And this book is really, it's a gem. Ace, let's talk about the first Noel.
Boy, there's some controversy there, because was that song from England or was that song from France? My research basically shows it was from France. Okay. I mean, it was not, an English song in my mind. But if you open up some hymnals, it has the English spelling, which is Nowell. Oh. And other ones have the Noel that we're used to seeing. And this is a song that resonates with so many people because of, there's a modern song, by the way, that I think ties in with it real well. But modern being in the last 50 or 60 years. But you hear the first Noel, and you listen to it and you think, okay, goodness, that really reaches the depth of my thinking. It touches my soul in so many different ways. And, it's a song that's 50 years old as far as happening in print goes. And yet it's much, much older than that. It was probably sung and discovered in England, but I think it migrated from France, where it was a folk song talking about Christ's birth. Written by a peasant, we don't know who. As there were very few Bibles in circulation during that time, and most common people couldn't read and never saw a Bible. I would have to guess, because it was written originally in Latin rather than French, I'd have to guess that a priest wrote it, possibly a monk, someone who had knowledge of what was happening in a biblical language, because we have so many of the songs, like I Saw Three Ships, where a peasant wrote it, and it has nothing to do with the original story. You know, the wise men are arriving in a ship, and there's no desert and all this other stuff, you know, and you're not in the middle of the East. This one is biblically accurate. And what I think I like about it the best is it's one of those go-to songs that takes you to Christ's birth and the birthplace, and is a song that really does paint a picture with its words. A very simple song. You know, I alluded to the fact that it reminds me of a much more modern song, and that's a song that was released in the late 1950s, early 1960s, called "Do You Hear What I Hear?" And I think I when I was talking to the authors of that song, they did not tell me that they were influenced by the first Noel, but the mere fact that one of those songs writers, the male version of that songwriting, husband and wife songwriting team's name was Noel in real life, and he was inspired by the United States involvement in Vietnam to thinking there would never be peace on earth. And so he had survived World War II in his native country of France. And he wrote that song. And I think it echoes the first Noel in a very modern way that harkens back to telling the story. You take those two songs together, and I think you bookend all of Christmas.
I agree.
By the way, what I love about the second song, "Do You Hear What I Hear?" is not just the power of the song, but the fact that this man immigrated to the United States from France, not being able to speak any English, walked into a hotel to get a room on the first night he was there, and playing the piano in the lobby of a hotel was a woman. She spoke no French, but they met that night and somehow communicated with each other and fell in love and got married.
Oh, wow.
And they're the writers of this song, and his name was Noel, and her name was Gloria.
That's a fantastic story. All right, Ace, give us some background on the 12 days of Christmas. I'm so curious about this song.
There's a lot of controversy on that song, because you have a lot of groups that say it is not a code song. And I went back and looked at it, and if it's not a code song, then there is a whole lot of coincidence in this song that just doesn't add up and make sense to me. I've been told it is a code song that was written to sound nonsensical by Catholics in Great Britain in the 1850s. As a matter of fact, it was taught in Catholic schools in America as a code song in the early 1900s, clear through the 1950s. I've gone through, I'm not a Catholic, but I've gone through some Catholic libraries and found references to it as well. And at the time that song was released, and I said the 1550s and 60s and 70s, Catholicism had been outlawed in Great Britain, and just teaching it, you could be drawn and quartered. So you could be executed. And I was told that the Catholic Church came up with ways to share their particular stance and faith at Christmas through the 12 days of Christmas. And each one of the 12 days represents a an element of the scripture. Like the partridge in a pear tree, the partridge was the only bird that would lay down its life for its nest, so that represents Christ. 10 lords a leaping, that's the 10 commandments, the lords being the law, the ones who preceded. So, the 2 represents Old and New Testament. So, each one of these taught something to the children in the church. Now, whether it was a nonsensical song that they adapted or whether it was written as a code song that they used and everyone else in England, sang it not knowing what it was, I have no idea. I'm going to lead to the fact that I don't think you would write this song with the 1, 2, 3, 4 through 12 days without having some knowledge with Lord's Leaping and other things that the 11, the pipers piping being the disciples and other, without some knowledge of the scriptural setup. Something else that it ties in with was when this song was written, you started celebrating Christmas on the 25th. So that would have been the first day of Christmas. And January 6th would have been the 12th day of Christmas.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. All right, I've got a number of songs I'm going to ask Ace about, but I bet you might have one as well. If you've got a question, a song about Christmas, and maybe it's a song you've loved and you'd always wanted to know what's behind it, he is most likely able to tell you what it is. We can also stump him, but I doubt it. If you have a song you want to send over, the text line is open, 877-933-2484. You can also go to acecollins.com to learn more about Ace. We'll be right back. We carry each other's burdens. Please know you can bring us your prayer concerns and we will pray. Share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio team by texting or calling 877-933-2484 or share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio staff and listeners at myfaithradio.com. Oh, I love this time of the year, and I love being able to have Ace Collins on not once but twice. We're talking today about his book, Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. And we've got a couple of comments that have already come in, Ace. Regarding the 12 days of Christmas, is there someplace I can go to find the rest of that, what might be a code?
Yeah, you can go to the book, obviously. Either one, I actually outlined it in 2 different books.
Okay.
The one is The Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. You can find it in there. And the other you can find it in is The Stories Behind the Great Traditions of Christmas, because, the 12 days of Christmas is a tradition. So in the midst of that, I can give you, you can find it both places. But just so I'm accurate with it, let me actually open my cheat sheet, which I haven't had to do today so far, and I will just read them out.
Okay.
And that way you can,
They're recorded then.
We
on
can
the podcast.
we can actually give you an indication as to what those 12 days were. So let me, Great Traditions of Christmas, a book we're talking about next week. And so we can actually do that. Now, what was the other question while I'm looking this information up?
The other question was on, I heard the bells on Christmas Day.
Oh, gosh. I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day is, in my viewpoint, one of the most haunting songs ever written. Written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who had recently lost a wife. She had caught her nightgown on fire with a candle and burned to death.
Oh, my.
And it was in the midst of the Civil War, and so many of his students were fighting the war and dying and not coming back. I mean, there were so many different things going on, and it was all downers. And he was having a real problem coping with it. And he got to the point where he lost his faith. And on Christmas morning, he was doing what he always does on his time off. So besides being a university professor, he was actually scribbling out poems. And in the process of scribbling out poems, he just wrote it. Read the first 2 or 3 verses of that, and you'll find out how depressed he was. Is God dead? He asked in that. And in the midst of that, the church bell started ringing, and it restored his faith, brought his faith back to life. And of course, he triumphantly said, God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. But like so many songs, it was written in fits of depression when he could not find anything to hold on to that gave him hope. And suddenly the bells ringing at Christmas Day gave him that hope. That's powerful.
That's so
By
good.
the way, mention the partridge in a pear tree, gift number 1. 2 turtle doves, Old and New Testament. 3 French hens might not mean anything today, but that was the most expensive food back in the 15th and 16th century. So it represented, what do you think? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, the 3 gifts. 4 birds a calling, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If you're the 5 books of the Old Testament called the Law of Moses or the Torah, that represents the 5 rings, the 6 geese a laying. That's interesting because the laying is the story of God moving his hands over the earth for the first 7 days of creation. 7 swans swimming, those are the gifts of the prophets, the gifts of the Holy Spirit: prophecy, service, teaching, encouraging, giving, leadership, and mercy. And they were with swans because swans were such elegant and graceful creatures. 8 maids a milking. The milkmaid was the lowest job you can have in England, yet Christ came for the milkmaid just like he came for the kings. And so came for the meek and lowly. There was no separation of status in Christianity. And then you get to the other fruits of the Spirit in the next one with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Lord's a leaping, I mentioned earlier, that represents the 10 disciples. I mean, the 10 commandments. And then there were, the 11 pipers piping. That's the 11 disciples. Why aren't there 12? Well, Judas betrayed Christ, so there were only 12. 12 drummers drumming represents the important confessional taught to all Catholics, which is called the Apostles' Creed. And if you read the Apostles' Creed, you'll understand why the word 12 was used there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Ace. Another comment came in about there's a movie about the Longfellow song, which is apparently a real tearjerker.
Well, if you think about it, my Lord, this guy had a son that came back crippled from the war. He had lost his wife at the same time the war was going on to burning to death. He was alone, basically. And the students who didn't die, his students that were coming back from the war, were coming back crippled or blinded, without limbs. And it was a very hopeless time in this man's life. But the last couple of verses are very hopeful. It actually shows a man who lost his faith and regained his faith. And each verse represents a different chapter in that experience.
Mm-hmm. Ace Collins is my guest. We're talking about the stories behind the best loved songs of Christmas. Ace, I would love for you to talk about I'll Be Home for Christmas.
Gosh. Who would have thought I'll Be Home for Christmas would be tied to the great rock and roll group, the Platters?
I didn't know that.
But one of the writers of that song actually was the man behind putting the Platters together and writing many of their songs as well. But this was a decade before the Platters ever came together and before the war started, as a matter of fact, about 15 years. And a man who, in the midst of World War II, a young songwriter who was going to college was worried that the girl he'd left behind had forgotten him. And he wrote her a letter basically saying, I'll be home for Christmas. And that inspired the songwriters to put together this particular song. It's only 12 lines long. It's one of the shortest songs of all time. Many of the words don't make sense in modern terminology, such as presents on the tree, not under the tree. But presents were small enough back then to be tied to a tree. Most presents were. Electric trains kind of ended that tradition. You tied an electric train to a tree and it would fall over. But those little things, but this song was finished about 3 or 4 years after it was begun by two other songwriters. And the three of them got together and figured out who owned it and who didn't own it. And they made an agreement to release it with all three names on it. And they took it to Bing Crosby in 1943, who was looking for a follow-up to White Christmas, which had been a number one song the year before. Crosby recorded it. It became a monster hit. And it became what I call a secular prayer, because these were people who were separated by war and were worried their families were not going to get back together again. And there was that empty place at the table. And I think anybody who has been through family being separated by war or by other things, jobs or other things, knows the feeling of separation. And in my case, it's because of the death of my wife. There is a great 2 years ago. There's a great feeling of Christmas not being complete, and therefore, this song spoke to a nation at war, like no song released during that time, and people gravitated to it and listened to it as kind of a prayer. And you can imagine what this song meant to men who were fighting battles across the Pacific and then in the European theater, and wondering, will I ever get home again? It's haunting when you think of it that way.
Sure
it means something much different to most people today. My favorite version, ironically enough, is not Bing Crosby's version. I really like the way Elvis Presley did it on his 1957 Christmas album.
Mm-hmm. Wow. All right. If you have a song you would like to ask Ace Collins about, the text line is open, 877-933-2484. Ace, what about the song that it came upon the midnight clear?
Gosh, that's another one of those classic carols. One of the questions I always get asked a lot is, why does certain songs, why do they last and others don't? Because there's been tens of thousands of Christmas songs written, since the time of Christ. Why does one like It Came Upon a Midnight Clear last and others disappear the next year? And I think a lot of it is when it's released. It Came Upon a Midnight Clear was released at the perfect time for a Christmas song. It was written by a preacher whose last name was Sears, no relation to the department store. And he was looking for a song to share with his church and his family. And he wrote this song, It Came Upon a Midnight Clear, obviously inspired by the gospel. And I don't know that it would have been a major song at any other time except when it was released, because Americans had just begun, particularly the non-Catholic and non-Lutheran Americans had just begun celebrating Christmas. Before that, churches in America ignored Christmas. Protestant churches did. They didn't even have Christmas services unless it fell on a Sunday. And then they didn't really mention the birth of Christ much. And then all that changed in about 1840, when Christmas moved from a holiday in England and in America, where it was Mardi Gras on steroids, where men went out and drank and got plastered and then went and caroused and caused all kinds of problems, begging for booze and money and food, and police forces had to be out to protect women and children, and women and children stayed home, and Protestant churches didn't stay open, and the government did stay open.
Wow. I
mean, it was no holiday. And then Clark Clement Moore wrote "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," which we know as originally it was "Visit from St. Nick." We know it as "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And a queen in England, Victoria, married Prince Albert, who brought all the great German traditions of family to England. And within 10 years, everything changed because of those two things. This song was released right at the end of that 10-year period when people were looking for Christmas songs to sing in churches. Now, realize churches had never, except for the Catholic Church and Lutheran Church, had never sung Christmas songs before. Suddenly there was an open window, and mostly it was preachers who wrote it, like It Came Upon a Midnight Clear, O Little Town of Bethlehem. These were all written in America at this time, and churches were hungry for music. If it had been written 30 years before, churches wouldn't have picked it up. It had been written 100 years later, it possibly would have been lost with all the Christmas songs that have been written. But this was an inspired song written by a preacher to flesh out a sermon. It was sung after he had talked about, Christmas Eve and the night that Jesus came. And this was his way of using his choir to bring music to that story.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to take a short break and come back. I've got a couple of requests back to back on the text line, Ace, about Silver Bells. So when we come back, I'm going to ask Ace Collins about the song Silver Bells. If you have a song that you would like information about, you can text it over 877-933-2484. My guest is Ace Collins. You can learn more about Ace at his website, acecollins.com. We'll be right back. Thanks for joining the show. Ace Collins is my guest, and he is nice enough to give us a couple hours of his time every year. And today we're talking about his book, Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. And I just had a couple of requests, 2 in a row, asking about Silver Bells.
Yeah, a great song written by Jay Livingstone and Ray Evans for the movie The Lemon Drop Kid, which starred Bob Hope. This is a fascinating little story because they wrote the song in their office. It was inspired by a bell one of them had on their desk. And they went home and they played the song for their wives. And their wives literally, I talked to one of the songwriters, fell off the couch laughing. And the little songwriters were just shocked. And they said, "What are you laughing about?" And she said, "This is a perfect song for Bob Hope. Everybody's going to be laughing throughout the entire movie about this song." And they're going, "It's supposed to be a serious moment in the movie." And the wives suggested they change the title to the song. They had written a song about this little bell on this desk called Tinkle Bell. So the original song was Tinkle Bell, It's Christmas Time in the City. And the wives convinced the songwriters, Livingstone and Evans, that didn't work. And they suggested they change it to Silver Bells. The wives didn't get any credit on writing the song, but they probably saved the song. One of the elements I love about this song, Bob sang it with Marilyn Maxwell. Bob was dressed up in a Santa suit as they were walking along the street. And there's a line in there about stoplights blink bright red and green. There's no mention of yellow. I was curious about that. They hadn't invented the yellow light yet. It just went from red to green. There was no caution, slow down light yet. That's funny. So that is why that is in there. Hope was so thrilled with the song because Bing Crosby had had 3 number-1 Christmas hits. In the 1930s, he had taken Silent Night to the top of the charts. 1942, he had taken White Christmas to the top of the charts. Then, as we mentioned a while ago, he took I'll Be Home for Christmas to the top of the charts. And Bob desperately wanted a Christmas song of his own. But Bob got busy and didn't bother recording it for a while. And Bing went to the studio and recorded Silver Bells before Bob did and had the hit on it. So even though this should have been Bob Hope's Christmas hit, Bing Crosby's knocked the top out of the charts at Christmas time for the 4th time in his life with a Bob Hope song, Silver Bells.
Wow. Fantastic.
I don't know how much friction that caused between the two friends, but it really was Bob's fault because he put off recording it for 6 months.
Speaking of Bob, I was just talking to my friend Bob Stromberg, and I said, Bob, stay listening because I'm going to have Ace talk about Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer, and this story brings tears to my eyes every time you tell it.
I just got through doing a 20 minutes on this with the American Cancer Society. Go back to the late 30s, wrong side of town in Chicago, cold November night in a tenement apartment, essentially a 2-room apartment with a bath, kitchen and living room combined. And a little girl named Barbara May crawls up into her father's lap, pushes a newspaper to one side, and asks him, why can't my mommy be like all the other mommies in the world? It almost broke Bob May's heart. He looked across at his wife, Evelyn, who had had cancer for the last 2 years, and this little girl didn't remember her mother healthy. So Barbara's mother, Evelyn, had never played with her, never taken her to the park, gotten to read with her, never felt very good. And all of the money that Bob was making as a copywriter for a large department store chain was used to help treat the illness. So Bob didn't even have money that November and December for a Christmas present. So he told the story that combined two elements of his own life. First was he had been bullied because he was a small child. And the second was he wanted his daughter to know his wife's real personality. So he put his personality in the character. Barbara loved the story so much that she asked to hear it again the next night and the next night. And Bob, who had no money for a Christmas present, but had some skill as a copywriter and also as the ability to draw, created a homemade book with color pictures to give Barbara on Christmas Day. The last few pages of that book, legend has it, have tear stains in them because Evelyn dies. People are coming by on Christmas morning not to celebrate Christmas, but to literally mourn the passing of loved ones. And friends are there. But Barbara is very excited about her gift, and she shows it to everyone. And one of the coworkers at the place Bob is employed tells Bob, this is wonderful. You need to read this at the company New Year's Eve party. He does. The company buys all rights to that book, which pays off his medical debts for his wife and moves his daughter and he to a nicer part of town. And for the next 7 years, every child that sits in Santa's lap gets Bob's story and Bob's drawings in a book form when they visit Santa at the stores. Well, several years later, a publisher came to them and said, we want to take your story to the world. This is right after World War II. And Montgomery Ward, in an act that is, I still think, one of the great acts of all time, gave all rights back to Bob May. And Bob May suddenly found himself with the best-selling children's book in the world.
Wow.
He had remarried, and his new wife's brother was a songwriter, a jingle writer. And this guy came to Bob and said, let's write a song about your reindeer. And they did. And this is another irony that ties to Bob Hope. They took it to Bob Hope, and he turned it down, decided it wasn't a good enough song to record. Bing Crosby turned it down. Dinah Shore, who most people have forgotten what an incredible song career she had. She had over 400 chart records, but never a Christmas hit. And a Christmas hit makes you kind of immortal. So she never had that Christmas hit. She turned it down as well. Another singer-actor turned it down until his wife heard the demo record and said, Gene Autry, you got to cut the song about the reindeer nobody will play with. He put it as the B-side of a release. And disc jockeys were smart enough to turn it over and play the B-side, and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer became the second greatest selling Christmas song of all time after White Christmas when it was released at that point, and churned a movie and everything else and made Johnny Marks, the songwriter, pretty successful because he turned around and wrote Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree for Brenda Lee.
Oh, wow.
And then a few years later wrote Holly Jolly Christmas for Burl Ives.
That's quite a career.
Yeah, but you think about that story of Rudolph,
Mm-hmm.
and I've told that story on stage with people not knowing what that song was until they heard me say at the end, you got to do the song about the reindeer nobody will play with. That's a powerful song, but it's also a powerful statement. Here's a man who had no money for a gift, and he created a homemade gift for his daughter. It was just supposed to teach her about her mother and teach her a little bit about his life. And yet this is a gift given with only love behind it. And yet, like Christmas, and this is the great lesson of Christmas, I think, maybe the greatest lesson in all the stories I found, song stories I found, a gift given with love comes back magnified to the giver time and time again. That's the ultimate Christmas story.
So good. Ace Collins is my guest. I'm going to take a short break and come right back. The book is called Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. AceCollins.com if you want to learn more about Ace. He's written over 100 books. We'll be right back in just a couple of minutes. It is my deepest desire that you take the very first step of faith by placing your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. If you've got questions about what it means to begin a relationship with Jesus, text the word faith to 41224. My guest today is Ace Collins. We're talking about his book, which I would encourage you to get a copy of and have it on your coffee table around this time. Just pull it out every year, almost like a part of the Christmas decorations. It's Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. All right, Ace, let's talk about Isaac Watts's inspiration for Joy to the World.
Joy to the World. I mean, you know, when you look at Joy to the World, for starters, let's talk about Watts. I love the story behind Watts because people think teenagers are smart aleck now, but they weren't in the past. Isaac Watts' dad was a preacher. And one day, Isaac Watts came home from church and looked at his dad and said, "Church is boring." And his dad said, "What are you talking about? We sing the same songs every week." And back then, by the way, they only sang psalms out of songs, and they only had about 6 different tunes to them. And so they really were kind of monotonous. And what Watts's father told the teenager was, well, if you can do better, write something new. Well, he ended up writing about 5,000 hymns. So he did better. I mean, you know, this is a guy who answered the call. And so if you look through your hymnals, man, Isaac Watts is everywhere. He was born in 1674. He was an interesting guy because he had great intellectual depth. He, as I said, found church music and church in general boring. So he found ways to, in a modern terminology, I guess, to jazz it up. You know, he wrote a lot of poetry and a lot of songs, and Psalm 98 inspired this one. So one of the psalms he sang as a kid inspired his Joy to the World. So most people think of Christmas music being New Testament music, but this was looking forward to the birth of the Messiah. And he wrote it. Then 46 years later, a guy named Lowell Mason arranged it with different music, and they combined to give us the song that we know today.
All right, Ace, here's another song that always touches my heart, and that's O Holy Night.
Gosh, we don't have time for the whole story, but let me tell you, O Holy Night was written for a Christmas Eve Mass in France about 200 years ago. The man who wrote it took it to a friend of his who wrote opera songs. The opera said, man, it's a great poem, but I'm not qualified to write the song. He leaned on him, and he did, and it became very popular in France for 5 years, and it was kicked out of the Catholic Church in France because the man who wrote the music was Jewish. Came to America as an anti-slavery song by the abolitionists. Slaves, chain shall he break because the slave is our brother is a line in one of the things. Became a Christmas song in the United States after War. And then in 1906, a man named Fessenden did what was considered the impossible. He invented a transmitter that could wirelessly transmit the human voice. And on that night, read the second chapter of Luke, and people were amazed as they were supposed to be hearing Morse code, hearing this guy's voice. And then he picks up a violin, and the first song ever played on the radio was "Oh Holy Night."
Oh, wow. That's amazing. All right, Ace, we can't talk about Christmas music without bringing up Irving Berlin.
Irving Berlin, when he wrote White Christmas for Bing Crosby, he wrote it for the movie Holiday Inn. He had written all the music for that movie, and he played the other songs, then told Bing Crosby, you won't like the Christmas song. It's horrible, but I'll play it for you anyway. And Bing heard it and said, no, it's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And the movie was supposed to be filmed in 1942, and this was early December 1941 when Bing first heard the song. A few weeks later, we were involved in World War II, and Christmas Eve on his NBC network radio show, Bing Crosby sensed that 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, we needed a little hope. And so he sang that song for the very first time in the NBC studio, lit up with requests to sing it again and again and again. It actually didn't record it until the next year, and it became the number one Christmas hit in 1942.
Mm-hmm. What about "O Come All Ye Faithful"?
Another great Latin song, origins. You can hear monks singing it 500 years ago. We don't know who wrote it, but it was obviously written by a cleric who had a great understanding of the original nativity and what went on there and the story behind Christ. It is historically accurate, which a lot of carols are not.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what about O Come Emmanuel"?
Come Emmanuel is the oldest carol that we still sing in its entirety.
Really?
The O's, each verse starts with an O. You can hear people 1,100 years ago when that song was first sung, singing that song, those little rock cathedrals in Eastern Europe, with chanting it in Latin. It is a song that has survived the test of time when thousands of others happen. The only song that we sing that is older, that part of it's older, and that's Gloria in Excelsis Deus, Angels We Have Heard on High. That goes back to probably about 130 AD.
Wow. You know, when you think of things that trigger memories, there are few things like Christmas music that brings back more memories faster than hardly anything as far as I can remember. It's a time machine. It is a time machine.
It is a time machine that wipes away the years, and you're young again, and you remember the way your grandmother's house smelled when you come get it. By the way, the song I was curious about as a child, if we're talking about childhood, was "God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen."
Mm.
I always wondered why God wanted happy people to sleep. It made no sense to me at all.
Yeah.
I thought it was a plot by adults to get kids to go to bed earlier. And that was the first song I did the story behind when I got the contract. And the word rest in Old England had several meanings 600 years ago when a peasant wrote that song, somebody whose name we'll never know. But, and it meant make or keep. So we should be singing it, God make you merry, gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ your Savior was born on Christmas Day. But I did a little more digging and found out that 600, 700, 800 years ago, Merry didn't necessarily mean happy. And that's why the Brits say Happy Christmas to this day, and we say Merry Christmas because it always meant happy in the United States. But back 500, 600, 700 years ago, it also meant mighty or great. And it was thought to be really happy, you had to be wealthy. The peasants had a tough life. And so the meaning of it, when you look at it with Robin Hood or Merry Old England, was not happy. It was Robin Hood and his mighty men, mighty Old England. We should be singing, God rest ye merry gentlemen, this way. God make you mighty, gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ your Savior was born on Christmas Day, which means that I wish everybody a mighty Christmas when I write my Christmas cards.
I love it. I love it. So I wish you a mighty Christmas. Ace, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk about the stories behind the best loved songs of Christmas. I know I get you again for another hour a week from today. We're going to talk about the best loved traditions of Christmas. Thank you so much for joining the program.
Thank you all. As my wife would say to all of her all of our people out there are students, 143, which means I love you. So be sure and text everyone you love tonight, 143.
Beautiful. Thanks, Ace. That wraps up our show for the day. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to spending more time with you tomorrow. Have a great night. We'll see you then. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.
Imagine standing at the edge of life and seeing angels.
I looked back and I went, that might have been an angel.
On the special episode of the Unfolding Podcast, hear true stories of angelic encounters and glimpses of heaven from Dr. Henry Cloud and John Burke, the author of Imagine Heaven, the perfect reminder of the wonder of Christmas. On this week's episode of The Unfolding, on Apple and Spotify, and at myfaithpodcasts.com.